must be your skin that I'm sinking in. It must be for real, 'cause now I can feel. And I didn't mind, it's not my kind. It's not my time to wonder why everything.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cloud-Based Mayhem. I haven't talked about our subscription model and how that all works in supporting the show at the top of the show in quite some time. We have it at the end all the time, but I'm sure many of you get to that point and have heard it and move on. So I thought I'd drop this into the top just as a reminder of how this all happens at the Cloud-Based Mayhem. We rely on you rather than sponsors to make all this work. I think digital media these days is mostly supported through sponsors and ads and that kind of thing. And I'm finding that model more and more and more toxic. And I also don't want to fill the first 10 minutes of your listening time, and which is valuable, with trying to sell mattresses and that kind of stuff. So we like to cut right to the chase and get into the talk. But to make all that work, there is a lot of expense here and a lot of time and a lot of effort and editing and all that kind of thing, and music and storage and website. So to make it work, we rely on you. And as I've always said, all we ever ask for is $1 a show. However, we don't put anything behind a paywall. If you can't support the show, and I don't want your support to the show to dig into any other aspect of your life. I'm only looking for support from people who can truly afford it. Don't want it to cut into your lattes in the morning or anything. So, but if you can support it and you can help us out, we really, really appreciate it. It makes all of this work. You can find all the ways to do that through the website, cloudbasedmayhem.com. We have a set it and forget it way, either through the website or through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. You can buy merchandise. We have great Patagonia t-shirts and recaps trucker hats that are awesome. Always have new stuff coming in all the time. I've actually just placed a big order for refilling the barrels there. And so you can do it that way. You can also buy the book, which we've just released. That'll be shipped in April, Advanced Paragliding. You can find all the ways to do this, again, on the website. And if you can't support the show, I totally understand. You don't need to tell me why. Just send me an email and I'll get you all set up with a lifetime account. Again, we don't put anything behind a paywall. What the subscriber side of things does is give you access to all the bonus content, which we put out pretty regularly. I haven't been so great about that lately, but we've got some great ones coming up, including a full kind of tutorial on using SkySight with Matt Scudder, who is the main developer behind SkySight down in Australia, sailplane pilot and now paraglider pilot. And a great podcast with him that we recorded recently that we'll have up in the bonus material, where he takes you through, kind of like Lisa did for us with XC Skies. He takes you through that whole platform. It is really powerful. They are doing some wonderful things there at SkySight. I think this will become, if it's not one of your go-tos right now for weather, it will be after watching this. So yeah, reach out. Thank you so much for your support. It really does make this job a lot easier. It makes me smile. And let me know if you've got suggestions for the show. I take those very seriously. We are quite backlogged with suggestions, of course, but I do get to them. I do reach out. We've got tons in the can right now. I've got shows that'll take us all the way through the Alps, so we're well set up there. But I'm enjoying it. I enjoy your comments and your suggestions and your emails. And I love, of course, hearing from all of you who tell me that the show has either saved your life or kept you from having an accident or just made you a better pilot. That's why we're doing it. That's very exciting. Top of the show tip this week comes from Josh Cohn. Enjoy.
So we got two questions from Eric Bader. The first one is, when thermaling, if you fall out the back, is it better to crank a steep turn to get back in the thermal quickly or carve a nice turn? Would your answer be different on the windward side? So the main thing I think it depends on is how steep the lift gradient is at the edge of the thermal. So if it's pretty smooth transition, then yeah, carve a nice turn. And also if it's kind of light tropical sort of conditions, you'll often just need to do a really flat, smooth turn to not, to still be going up, especially if you're low. Whereas if it's a well-defined, tight, strong core, then crank it around. And then in terms of the windward side, yeah, typically if there's significant wind, the core on the windward side is more well-defined. You pretty much want to, like, as soon as you start hitting that windward edge, you want to turn pretty quickly to not totally fall out. But it's often not super sinky on that side either. So whereas on the downwind side, it can often be more turbulent and sinky. So I don't know. You want to avoid falling out either side, I guess. All right, second question. When in a spiral dive, is the drogue chute better than tucking feet under the harness and spreading the knees to use the pod as a drogue chute? If it is better, is it a lot better? Obviously, the drogue chute does not freeze the crotch, but is it worth it? So I had a drogue chute for a bit, and I just never got around to using it. And then I asked was looking for a place to put it in my harness, and asked the designer of it where he kept his, and he was like, "Oh, I don't use one." So I don't know. It seems like they do a good job of making spirals more comfortable. I don't think using the pod probably works as well for that, partly because you have to sit up, which changes your whole dynamics in the harness. But I haven't really tested that, so I don't know. Thanks, Eric.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that, Josh. Cool advice. My guest today is Rico Chandra, a Swiss pilot who embarked on a 1,000K solo vol biv last year. This was his first bivvy. It all went swimmingly, and just he reached out and said, "Hey, I did this kind of cool thing. We should talk about it." And man, we had fun with this conversation. Really interesting guy, and had a blast with his bivvy, and his approach was great. And he also has he had takeaways both from the bivvy, but before then on just safety and how to approach things that I really found super useful, and has a bunch of kind of like guardrails and rules to keep it between the lines, as Chris Santa Croce says, that I think are great, and talks about having a superpower that I loved. And by the way, the music you heard in the opener here was produced by our guest today, Rico. Please enjoy this conversation with Rico Chandra. Don't let the days go by. Rico, awesome to have you on the show. Thanks for reaching out this last week, and I'm excited you got to hear that show with Tim, and sounds like you've just been doing some really cool bivvy as well. So I'm excited to hear about what you learned and what you're changing and how that all went. And I guess you're in quarantine, so we got plenty of time for this one. You just got back from South Africa. Let's start there. Tell me about what you were doing down in Cape Town.
Well, thanks for having me, Gavin. Hi. I was in Cape Town for 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks, kiting, flying. It's, from Europe, it's just you get on the plane in the evening and you wake up in this more or less same time zone in the summer. So I don't really like the cold. So I was down there kiting and flying and enjoying good food. Not too much wine. They have a pretty serious lockdown, absolute prohibition of alcohol.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that one. Yeah, it's funny. This thing's just so different everywhere you go.
Yeah, it keeps their hospitals less full because they have a lot of alcohol-related
of course. Stuff. Yeah, right. How's the flying?
It's beautiful, but the Cape freaks me out in terms of flying. It's super strong and windy. I think if you want to, I think what you have to do there is just go serious cross country, try to do records, but like to go for small cross, like 50Ks, 100Ks, that's, it's just, scary with the wind. There's a lot of wind, sea breeze that cuts in, and I'm always sort of freaked out to fly down there.
Right. Yeah. And then you get in the water and you got to be freaked out about the sharks. I've spent quite a bit of time down there as well.
I'm cool with that. The shark anxiety sort of went away.
Nice, nice. So, hey, for those who are listening who don't know you, let's give a real brief of your background. When did you get into flying, and what brought you to Volbiv? And before we, how much experience do you have?
I started flying 28 years ago and made it through these 28 years without injury. I dabbled in comps, in the late 90s. Stopped doing that because I'm claustrophobic. I can't deal with other people getting close to me. It drives me nuts. So I've been flying XC mainly since then. I wasn't in the higher ranks of XContest until 2020. I guess there's something to be said for the lockdown and all the other stuff going away. I had time to fly and didn't have to worry about, do I go out tonight and have a few drinks with friends and get home late, or do I go flying? It was sort of clear this year. So 2020 was like the first year where I ended up in the higher ranks of the XContest.
And what wing do you fly, and where's home?
I fly a Zeno, and home is Zurich, Switzerland. I used to travel a lot for work to Washington, D.C., but now Zurich mainly.
And what's your work?
We started together with a bunch of friends. We started a company 13 years ago in the security industry, selling border monitoring systems to governments, and been doing that ever since.
It sounds like COVID's had some kind of unexpected benefits for you. What's it been like for you the last kind of 9-10 months?
It's been great. I tend to be someone who's fidgety and running all over the place and trying to do 10 things at once. And for me, I mean, I'm sorry for all the people who got sick and
of course,
or had serious consequences. But for me, it was calm, a calm time, and I really had a great 2020, and the flying's been absolutely fantastic. We had great weather here in Switzerland, and had a couple of really nice flights. I had my Volbiv trip in August, so this has been one of the better years for me.
Yeah, tell me about this Volbiv. You 1,000K or something? Where'd you start? Where'd you end? How long did it take? Let's get into that.
I took I took the month of August off. Was on the road or on the track for about 25 days. Started in Zurich, Switzerland. My plan was to go east. Slovenia, Ljubljana was the original goal. It didn't go exactly according to plan. Like when I started, the weather was, foul. And 1 week into the trip, I was, not very far from home, and at the same time, Slovenia put Switzerland on the quarantine list. Like you couldn't enter the country. So I'm like, what do I do now? And instead of going east, I went west and made it to Fies, had a great flight there, which sort of gave me the inspiration to head east again. And then I did indeed go all the way to Slovenia, to Ljubljana, more or less, or where the airspace of Ljubljana starts.
Nice. What was the kind of style of the trip? Did you have any rules, or or was it just kind of winging it?
I thought about the rules, and I thought about, like, do I take cable cars? Do I hitchhike? Do I sleep in tents? Do I sleep in hotels? And I figure I'm going to do it mainly out of my own, on my, walking and flying. I'm not going to hitchhike. I'm not going to take the train. But if there's something, a cable car or some means of transportation going up to that launch that I want to go anywhere. And anyway, I'm going to take it. And that's kind of how I did it. In terms of...
Were you solo?
Yeah, I was solo. My girlfriend came to visit me on a couple of weekends, which was nice.
Cool.
I took along a tent until I lost the tent poles, and
did you leave them behind?
Yeah. I one campsite one morning, I guess I didn't pack them in,
and then you had a nice tarp.
Well, you feel kind of stupid, right, with a tent without tent poles, but I traded that against a bivvy bag, but I didn't. I found out pretty quickly that I sleep much better in hotels. The tent or the bivvy bag was just to not have to worry about anything. I decided I'm going to fly the way I want to fly and not worry about where I'm going to sleep until I'm on the ground. And if I find a hotel or, a farm or someplace where I can sleep, great. And if not, I'll sleep outside. It's just more comfortable if you've got a hotel room, and charging up your equipment there's something to be said for that also, because I didn't take along any solar panels or the like, or quick chargers. So I was quite happy. And in the Alps, there's always some place to stay.
So was your approach just launch, fly as far as you could, and then then figure it out? You didn't have any kind of, okay, I'm going to try to get here or there. It would just, take advantage of the day.
Yeah. Take advantage of the day. Exactly.
Cool.
I had a sort of plan for the route, which I sometimes stuck to and mostly didn't.
Had you done bivvies before this, or was this your first?
No, this was my first. This was my first bivvy. Like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I spent maybe a night or two wrapped in my wing, but I haven't done full biv before. And I, when I was in my 20s, I certainly wasn't keen on doing hiking with my wing on my back.
Tell me about your kit. Were you flying the Xeno for the bivvy too?
Yeah, that was definitely a mistake. I wouldn't do that again.
Just because of the weight?
The weight is the least of the problem. It's, launching out of launches where you don't want to get your line stuck. Or when you don't have, if you've got slight downwind, tailwind, there's, I guess the zeolite would have been the perfect wing. And I tested one, but for some reason I had this philosophy of, you have one wing and you do everything with that. So I took the Xeno. I didn't want to compromise on the flying, and I took the Xeno. But, also in terms of packing, the Xeno doesn't pack down nicely like the zeolite does. And then also landing the zeolite, you can really get into tight landing spots much better than with the Xeno. The Xeno's not bad. You can flap down pretty good, but I wouldn't take the Xeno again. I'd go for a lighter hike and fly wing.
Yeah, so just lighter, easier to manage, launch and landing, easier to pack. Yeah. What about harness and other stuff? Like you said, you didn't take solar panels or charging. What was the thought there?
I just didn't want to be bothered. I always felt sorry for, when I see pictures of solar panels hanging out on the front of the cocoon, I thought, gosh, I don't want to have stuff dangling around. I'm not going to do that. I'm here for the flying. I'm not necessarily here to do, prove to the world that I'm the world's greatest adventure sportsman. I'll do great flying and then, but yeah, I didn't want to mess with solar panels. The harness I had was a lightness 2, which was good for that purpose. There's loads of space to pack stuff in, especially if you take out the protectors.
And what were you using for instruments?
I just had my iPhone and the Fly Sky High app and the XC Tracer Mini 2.
The solar one.
Piece. Yeah. That's a great piece of kit.
Yeah, it's
I
awesome.
had that.
You never need to charge it.
An InReach with me and a Flymaster Sky. What's it called? Sky Tracker. One of these tracker things from Flymaster.
Yep. Anything tell me about the trip itself, and then I'll ask you more about kind of what you learned on the way. But so you started at home and got down to Fish, and then turned around and started going east.
Exactly. Yeah, got started from home. Spent the first 5 days more or less walking, with the occasional hop in between. Then had the weather started getting better as I made it to Fish. Got in a decent sized triangle there, and then headed east via crossing from Switzerland into Austria, then across the Timmelsjoch into Italy, and then from Italy back into Austria near Cillian, and then Italy back into Austria near Cillian, and then back into Italy by Villach in Austria.
Down the corner there.
Yeah, then from into Slovenia across the Bradil Pass.
Is that right there at Triglav?
It's not exactly where Triglav is. There's a mountain called Mongart, which is well known. It's the first place. It's like north of Bovets and Tolmin.
Yeah, got you.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little bit further east. So you went as far as you could in Austria, and then dropped down into Slovenia.
Yeah.
Maybe we could get a track log or a picture or screenshot of your whole route, and we'll put it up in the show notes for those that aren't familiar with that area. Because of course, all those names you just said, I know because we have spent so much time over there, but many don't. That's a nice route, beautiful.
Yeah,
I mean, I had never flown Slovenia until after the last Alps. Went with my family, and we stayed in there for about a month, and Sorica and I forget some of those launches, but we'd fly down that ridge line and then into Italy, and then keep going into Italy, which is pretty wild, and then back, and it's just the most amazing out and back. It's gorgeous. I mean, the Soka River, and such
beautiful.
Man, who dropped acid in my punch today? Man, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I found it really intimidating. I found it really intimidating, Slovenia. Coming in from the north. High mountains, lots of wind, tight valleys. There's a stretch there where you can't land, and then also the last leg from Tolmin, I think Kobala is the launch to where the airspace of Ljubljana starts, the place called Skofja Loka. That's just a stretch with Slovenian valleys with the heavily forested and not generously equipped with landing sites. That was
there's some
a bit edgy in the end.
It's very treed. It's one of these places. I don't know if you've flown. When you leave Slovenia and go into Italy, when you're doing that kind of classic out and back, you cross Gemona, and you get into a zone there where I was flying with a guy, Mike, who'd done it a bunch of times. If I hadn't been with somebody, I'd be like, "What the hell are we doing? There's nowhere to land. You just keep going. It's going to work, but you're just like, holy shit, this is deep." And I don't think people expect that in Europe. In the X-Alps, you get in this mindset where you just keep pushing no matter what, because there's going to be an LZ. But man, in places like that, there's not. I mean, you could, there's those little lakes, you could, which are, there's trees all the way around them. And there's like these little dammed lakes where I guess you could probably burn it in, and then, man, you're in for a shit of a hike. And there's no roads. There's nothing down there. There's no trails, at least that I could see from the air. But it's a little intimidating. It's weird because it's like the locals just know it's going to work. And if they have the right winds and the right sun and everything, you just keep going. But you're like, man, I hope this works.
Yeah, for me, it was the end of the trip. So I thought, well, worst comes to worst, I'll land in a tree and I don't need the glider anymore. I made it.
Oh, that's
no, that's sort of the self-talk. Some of the self-talk I had in those.
Okay, we're going to leave that in, but I don't know if that's it. It's like my thoughts about Monaco at the race. I hate Monaco so much, but Bruce, my supporter in the 2015 and 2017, he was like, you got to stop thinking like that, because he hated it too. He hates Monaco, and he's like, this isn't really the attitude we want to have, because that's where you actually want to get.
No, but you can leave it in. Because my attitude, as you'll see, I'm super safety conscious, and that's some of the self-talk to deal with anxiety while flying. But I'm really, I'd say, safety conscious, and I wasn't gunning it. And I've given up on the rule of thumb. There's always a place to land. If I don't see a landing, an LZ where I think I can get in, I don't go. I'll land and walk. That's one of the rules of thumb that I sort of, you'll always find a place to land. I've given up on that. I'm too old for that.
Nice. Yeah, well, let's get into that, because that's a good one. I'm more inclined towards that as well, especially since my days with Will Gadd and the Rockies. It's like, ooh, this is a long ways, Will. Are we sure we're going to make this? But you wrote, when you reached out to me about this bivvy, you wrote there were mistakes made, as there always is, and I think there is on just normal flights as well. So let's get into some of that. What did you learn? What were the takeaways?
So mistakes, I'm kind of analytic about this stuff, and so I group the mistakes into procedural mistakes and tactical mistakes. The procedural ones fall into two categories. The first, this is embarrassing. It's about losing stuff, but like losing my temp holds or losing my cap. But I noted pretty quickly, if I lose an essential piece of gear, that really sets me back, or that's the end of the trip. So
it's not like you're taking extraneous things on a bivvy. You don't have extras,
Yeah. So I got really pedantic about every time I got up, I pedantically double check, did I left something, like consciously check, did I leave something behind? Or I consciously make sure the zips of my pockets were closed, that I'm not losing stuff. And there's really only two ways to not lose stuff when you've unpacked somewhere and packing up and heading to the next place. And one is you have a checklist, and the other is you make sure you left nothing behind. And the left nothing behind works pretty well. It's a fast one, but it means you have to, first of all, when you're unpacking, not be a bit mindful where you unpack and have it sort of in a confined zone, the stuff. And then also consciously check. When I lost my tent poles, I'd already started walking 10 meters and thought, should I just turn around and do a final check? And I just said to myself, no, you've got so little gear. What's there to lose?
The classic.
Classic.
I had to learn this the hard way the very first day of the 2015 race, and we'd actually practiced this because my team knows that I'm a space cadet, and but you can imagine you're in a hurry, you're in a rush, you're trying to do everything really fast. And the first day we had a big flight, landed, and I just dumped everything on the grass. And then later, of course, there's a missing glove. My Bluetooth earpiece was gone because it's tiny. I didn't have it tied in. And, so I've learned now with bivvy, my first thing that comes out of the pack is my little tarp. And I just put everything on the tarp. And in the race, I don't have a tarp. So in the race, it's on my jacket. So the first thing is jacket comes off and all the stuff just gets stacked onto it. Because like you said, you have to make it part of your procedure. You got to be pedantic about it, or you just lose stuff.
With the jacket, I like that.
Yeah, just because there's grass. A lot of times in the Alps, especially, there's pretty tall grass, and it's so easy to just misplace something little. Even tent poles, they just they could disappear.
Also, I've made a point of carrying when undoing my pack and setting up to fly to carry my canopy up from where my stuff is dumped on the ground, to not be covering up, spreading my glider over stuff that I don't.
Yeah, that's a big one. The glider covers all kinds of stuff. Another day, I think that's first race. I think I took off one time and I had the camera, some device. I had like 3 things under my wing that I left behind. I was like, sorry, Red Bull, can you bring me new stuff? Yeah. Oops.
Yeah. So losing stuff, that's one you can fix by having good procedures. The other procedural one where I was constantly messing up was resources management. So under resources, I think of things like water, food, charge, having your devices charged, hooking up your P tube to fly, washing your lawn. I had 2 sets of boxer shorts, 2 sets of t-shirts, always, sort of one clean and one drying from washing it, getting that stuff washed, but also stuff like downloading the maps and the apps before you actually run out of cell phone coverage, or figuring out, how this map app works before you get. I was like somewhere in I remember I texted you, hey Gavin, what was the app that you used for the map? Because I was, my 3 map apps were not giving me what I wanted, and I was in the middle of somewhere, and so that's when I reached out to you on that. And thanks for the recommendation. The right way to do it, obviously, is to practice with those apps and maps and download the stuff before getting going. It seems obvious, but it's just I was constantly getting all sorts of resource management wrong.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's so easy to, have the checklist and check them off before you go. But, like even the inReach, it's one thing to turn it on and turn on tracking. It's another thing to use it effectively. And in an emergency situation, I mean, how many people turn those on and just can't even find their Latin long to and is it in the right format to tell somebody on the other end, and just little things like that. And with the mapping, we always actually have training days for me before the race, even though I've used them a million times and I've used them on all the expeditions and stuff. Like, I'm really familiar with Gaia and some of the other things we use, but you just got to always reorient to it unless you're using it all the time. So if you have even a little fake, bivvy in your backyard, and just fake it for a couple hours and set yourself little tasks just on foot, then it really helps. Yeah,
absolutely. And also, like, the charging sequence, when you get to a place where you can charge your stuff, in what sequence do you charge your stuff? Yeah, and then you spent the rest of the day editing your GoPro footage and stuff like that. And there is a sequence, like the resources management is figure out what the right sequence is to doing stuff. And there's so much you can do wrong on that.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I mean, I think that there's, when you have the solar panels hanging off your cocoon and stuff, Ben Jordan style, there's a place for that, but there's also, with a decent external battery, and if you're doing a bivvy in a place like the Alps, and assuming you're going to get to a hut or something every 3 or 4 days, you really don't need a panel. And the other thing is, just with an extra battery, I think you do need the extra battery and the appropriate cables. But
definitely,
I've never on on even the longest of my bivvies have I ever needed to charge while I'm flying. There's always in a bivvy, there's so much time in a day where you're sitting around in the morning making coffee, whatever, where, a little 7 or 9 watt panel can do a lot of good. But then if I was doing one in the Alps, I don't think I'd bring one. I just don't think it'd be necessary.
You wouldn't bring a battery, or
no, a solar panel. I bring a battery always.
You need a battery.
You need a battery,
like a power bank. And by the way, you mentioned food, or you mentioned like making coffee. I didn't take a stove. I didn't take stuff to cook, because in the Alps there's always some place to get. I had like enough food for one meal and water and a couple of like power bars or whatever. But there's in the Alps you always find a restaurant or a farm or something, and they'll give you food. So I didn't want to mess with cooking. By the way, in the show notes we can also link to that. I did like a video diary, and we can link to that on YouTube. And there's the entire list of stuff I took.
Oh, great. Tell me, let's move on to, so you got this kind of procedural stuff in
Those
resources, which is super valuable.
Yeah, the procedural mistakes, the tactical mistakes, there were sort of four kinds that I made. And I mean, there's obviously a lot more, but those makes no sense reviewing them without a map. But there's 4 sort of general ones which are independent of topography. One is giving up. Often I did give up due to fear or discomfort, and that probably applies to XC flying in general, where you've had enough and you give up.
So you classify that in these instances as a mistake. In other words, you were kind of just over it, but it was probably definitely good enough to keep going.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it is a mistake if it's due to discomfort. Like if you're giving up due to discomfort because you didn't attach your P tube, or you've got cold fingers, or you're freezing.
Copy. Yeah.
Fear can also be a mistake. Sometimes when you're on your own, you get scared just because the rocks around you look very intimidating, and you're alone. And if there were other paragliders there, you wouldn't be afraid. So it's kind of a mistake, but I'd be careful. It isn't a bad mistake to make. The consequences of landing too early are, I sort of thought, well, that's not going to kill me. That I might lose time, or I might look stupid, but that's not a big deal. Height management was like landing high, taking off, launching high. Landing high is sort of a no-brainer, but oftentimes I realized I could have landed higher, but didn't think I'd make the glide, but then I'd already started gliding for the lower landing site. And launching, I have this rule of thumb, like, when you're volbiving, or hike and fly, how high do you hike up before you launch? When are you high enough to hook a thermal and fly? My rule of thumb for that was this wouldn't be applicable for the X Alps, but for myself, if you're like recreationally flying, then my rule of thumb is I want to hike up high enough that if I bomb out, at least I can walk up another mountain and don't have to walk up the same mountain. And that for motivational purposes, I think that's a really good rule of thumb.
Oh, I like that. So you would get to a place where you're like, okay, I can see that if I don't hook anything, I'm going to be able to glide to there, and that's going to get me to a different launch down my course line a little ways, and it's going to be manageable energy wise.
Exactly, because there's launches you walk up to, and then you launch and you land, and the only option you have left is to walk right up to
What
where
just
you
did.
launch, and that's not good for motivation.
Yeah.
Then other tactical mistakes were map reading, trusting the GPS reading, of my iPhone. That's not always correct, or not reading misjudging the differences in elevation on the map. I did that a couple of times.
Are you talking while you're flying?
No,
okay.
while hiking.
Okay.
While hiking, actually.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The last bullet of like tactical mistakes is when to rest. Since this wasn't a race, there'd be, I think there were three days every week or so. I'd say weather's not so great, I'll rest. And I think I regretted it all 3 times, because
really?
the next day was even worse weather, and so
okay.
Resting, the decision to rest. I think if it's good enough to make distance, then make distance.
Okay. So maybe better self-assessment, okay, well, rest would be nice, but I don't really need it right now. I think we just do have to be tuned in to how switched on are we, because rest is important for sure. And bivvy takes, it can take a lot out of you.
Yeah. Although, if you put in a rest day, then like by 3:00 in the afternoon, you've caught up on your blogs and emails and you've charged all your equipment, washed your clothes, and you're like, what am I doing here? So yeah, rest.
Let's move to your hierarchy thing. And this is cool. 5 types of outcomes of bad decisions. Talk about that.
So bad decisions, like some of the stuff we talked about, it's got different outcomes, and I grouped those into 5 categories. The worst being getting hurt. Then one step below getting hurt is losing or breaking equipment. Then one step below that is discomfort, which could be like cold or rain or hiking, blisters, that stuff. Then the second lowest was losing time, and the lowest on the hierarchy is like looking bad. I mean, we're human. I'm not, I did feel pressure, having blogging about this and having people follow me on live tracking. It's nowhere near the pressure you must have during Alps, but bombing out isn't a feeling of I'm so awesome, and so, but sort of I decisions have consequences, and those consequences fall into these 5 categories, and the way I dealt with those categories was like I absolutely don't want to get hurt, and I'm really going to try to avoid losing or breaking equipment, and the rest of the stuff I'm not going to worry about. I'm not going to worry about discomfort or hiking, because if I was worried about discomfort, well, you shouldn't go on a Volbiv anyway. I wasn't going to worry about losing time, because one of the reasons I was doing this is sort of to face up to my own fear of missing out and chill. So I'm not going to worry about losing time. And looking bad, like or looking like a fool or feeling like a fool, I decided to completely let go of that. And one thing that helps with that is blogging, because then you feel more like a journalist and you can write about your feelings, which makes the blog more interesting for those reading it.
Sure.
And it gives you an excuse to it improves your content if you're not doing well. So that's how I dealt with those, how I sort of grouped those things. So all I wanted to prevent was getting hurt or breaking or losing equipment.
And did you have is this a good segue? Is that where the rules of thumb come in?
Yeah. So the rules of thumb that I have, they apply to flying more generally. So it applies very much to Volbit, but some of it just applies to XC flying in general. And, there is a lot of questions that you don't know when you're learning to fly. Like, when can I jump into the lee of a mountain, or how long can I edge out? How long can I remain in the air when there is a storm brewing? When do I need to go land? And you just don't know these things. Nobody teaches you, and so I guess I started out years ago, I guess, with just setting up a couple of rules of thumb, like hypothesis, and then I wasn't necessarily pushing all the way to the border, but just testing those hypotheses. So for example, when you're one of the most common added dangers, I think Volbiv brings, is edging out storms. Like, how long does it take you for you to say, nah, this is that cloud's too dark, I'm gonna go land? And the rule of thumb that I use there is so take this. I feel I have to put a disclaimer on this, because I don't think you can just apply this to your own flying without having tested it as a hypothesis for a long time before applying it. But the rule of thumb with storms is, as long as there's blue sky above me, I'm still good. So I think I even learned that from someone, but I picked it up and had it as a hypothesis for the last 15 years. And for the last 15 years, I've been, every time I fly or see others fly, I've been testing whether that hypothesis is true. Is it okay to have the rule of thumb? You can fly as long as there is still blue sky above you, you're good. And for all I've seen so far, that rule for me works pretty well when it comes to, the clouds are getting big or getting tall. How long do I remain in the air before I go land? So I'm not suggesting people follow these rules, but I'm suggesting it's worked out for me to set up rules of thumb and observe over years whether those make sense. And one of them I had to give up, which was, there's always going to be a place to land. I decided that is not true for me. There's not always a place to land. I want to see where I land before committing to a valley that I fly into.
Yeah, I guess I would put the disclaimer on the blue part with, every situation is different. And you said that, but, I can think of a few times, certainly in a desert environment, which is very, very different from the Alps, we can get massive cells a long ways away and still be
pour out cold air.
Exactly. It's just, if you can stay in the air, you might be okay. But if you decide,
but there's no landing,
that you need to land and you get hit in that gust front, it could be very blue where you are. Yeah. But you're suddenly the one experience I've had in the Alps that was similar to this was we were flying from Fish down to kind of Kur, and then we actually made it over and we were heading into Davos, and so down the Rhine basically. And we were on the north side of the Rhine heading east, and all day there was a huge cell on the Italian side that would have been kind of down towards St. Moritz, but on the Italian side, and really, really big. This was one of these where it went up into the upper atmosphere and started spreading out. And where we were was just brilliant. It was really beautiful. But I was with Bruce, and we kept talking to one another going, what do you think of that thing? Man, I don't know. It's really vertical. Well, yeah, but it's at least 40, 50 miles away, which is unusual to be able to even see in the Alps. You don't get that tall most of the time. And so often these cells are, you don't even see them. They might be on the other side of the main spine of the Alps, and you don't even see, but this one we could see because it was so big and it was so tall. But it was just brilliant. So at Kur, okay, let's keep going. And we got over the range, and, Davos is down below us, and we were both like, okay, that's enough. We've pressed this far enough. And we both spiraled to the ground really fast and touched down literally about 30 seconds before the gust front hit. So this thing had finally exploded and started running down the valleys. And we got on the train, and we were heading back to Fish, and we found out there was, I think, the Swiss Open or some pretty big comp had been, going that day. And two people, I believe, I think one died and another one ended in the trees because they got hit in that gust front. And so just again, anecdotal, but it's, one of these kind of, there's always an exception. And I think if there's big stuff around, you got to be thinking like, how much time, how far can I press this? We certainly press it a lot in the X Alps, and there's been a bunch of times where you're like, boy, that was close.
But to be clear, when I'm saying blue sky, I mean blue sky. And oftentimes when you have that kind of storm like you're talking about, the anvil really extends out far. And the cirrus clouds from the anvil, that is not blue sky. So
okay. Oh, good. Okay, good difference.
Yeah, that's important to mention. I believe there are probably exceptions to the rule, but the rule has worked pretty well for me. And oftentimes it's with big storms, it's the anvil that takes away the blue. And
good point. And it was probably, I bet by the time we landed, well, I remember this because it started raining pretty quick, So by the time we were dialing down out of the sky, it was getting gray. So it's a good one. I like that. Do you have any other of these kind of rules of thumb?
I have one which applies mainly to flying, as you mentioned, like flatland flying. Like one that works for me very well in the flatlands, like in Piedrahita or in the northeast of Brazil, is like the two zones. Like if I'm higher than 800 meters above ground, I'm in, I'm gunning it, and if I'm lower than 800 meters above ground, I'm in survival mode. And in survival mode, the rule of thumb, that's a well-known one that I follow, which is never leave lift to search for a lift. So if I'm, and for me, the survival mode, the border is strict, 800 meters above ground. I'm not going to leave lift to look for better lift. I'm going to wait until I'm higher than 800 meters above ground. And if I'm above 800 meters above ground, I'm going to snob anything that is slower than the day's average. So I'm not going to turn in anything that's slower than 2 meters. That's going up slower than 2 meters or whatever the average is for that day.
Yeah, that's great.
That sort of 2 gears, that works really well for me in the flatlands. Also being disciplined on the survival mode to not be optimistic but be pessimistic. And when I'm in the upper layer, I'm optimistic. In the Alps, it doesn't work out that well because you can't set a height above ground or altitude. That doesn't work so well, but in flatlands.
But I think you can still have that rule. I like that. I think when you're in the mountainous terrain, you just have a nice clean cutoff between survival and gunning it. And because often we wouldn't have that 800 because we're right on the terrain, but we're still really high. We're right over the peaks or something. If we went out over the valley, we'd have 2,000 meters or something.
Yeah.
So, I like that.
I think you can still do it, but it takes more fine tuning. Which zone am I now in? And it's very tempting to not admit that you're already in survival zone, or very tempting to remain in survival mode too long where you should be gunning it. I find it more difficult to set a clear dividing line between the two.
Let's return real quickly, Rico, to your fifth one in the list of, from bad to not so bad. The last one was, not looking like a doofus. And I mean, it makes you laugh, but I think we all struggle. We all have egos, and it's an important one. And, I've been reading a ton of sports psychology books in the kind of run up to this race, because obviously the mind is the thing that is the most important. There's the physical and everything else, which is obviously and skills and all that, but the mind is the big one. And I'm wondering if you had any other tools to help you drop the importance of those kind of last couple. You don't want to trash your gear, you don't want to lose your gear, you don't want to get hurt. But, we don't really want to care what we look like. Who gives a shit? You're the one out there having one, and everybody else is watching you on live tracking,
Yeah.
But it's easier said than done.
No, but I think I have a real advantage here, and that probably comes from flying for a long time. I think I'd even call it a superpower that I have, which is, I think I don't really mind bombing out, or I do mind, but I think it bothers me much, much, much less than most people I know. And it really is a superpower, and to have that, because if you think about it, without bombing out, this sport would not be interesting. We'd not be doing it. No one would. I mean, that's what makes us appreciate the good flights, and for me, that sort of developed. I honestly think that's a superpower of mine. I'm not too concerned about that, and to see it that way then even enforces that. To think of it that way enforces it to be a superpower, and you can even think of it, as actually, I'm here to have fun while everyone else is competing. And for me, that works really well. It's also a sort of luxury I have, because I'm not working in this business. I'm not, my livelihood doesn't come from this business. I'm not an instructor. I'm not sponsored in a big way. I don't owe anyone anything. So I can just be the recreational pilot I am.
I think there's, and we've talked about this on recent shows, but, when I look at the really consistent World Cup pilots, that you kind of very often see in the top 10, there's one thing they have in common, and that's that they don't freak out when they bomb out. They've been there enough. They've done it enough where they know that you're going to bomb out. We all bomb out. We all screw this up. And, it's just another day, another experience to put in your experience bag and move on. And I've been, one of these books I've been reading lately, I've been actually just reading it cover to cover over and over again, because I love it. It's called The Champion's Mind. And it talked about, that people that really excel and succeed in sport or anything else, they dump mistakes immediately. They don't, you think about like a football player or a basketball player, or, it talks about Michael Jordan. He was given the opportunity to make the game winning shot. I don't know how many times, lots, but he missed it like 28 times, a bunch. And, if he let that get him down, how could he ever try to make another game winning shot in the future? You just can't, you just got to let it go and get on to the next thing. You're going to drop a pass. You're going to throw an interception. And if you let that bug you, how can you play the rest of the game?
Exactly. And our sport is one which, thankfully, it humbles all of us so often. As soon as we get cocky, or even if we don't, it humbles us. So yeah, I'm really good at bombing out and then enjoying the rest of the day, enjoying the hike or whatever. In fact, one of the in Alps freeride, I don't know if you've heard of Alps freeride. It's our team here in Switzerland. A couple of the really good XC pilots are in it. It's just in the Swiss Cross Country Cup, and there's a lot of excellent pilots there. But especially one of the Serena Ronke. She's a young, she's been flying for 2 years or so. Like her attitude is just really amazing. When we go flying in the Alps, when we go cross country flying, usually for me, it used to be, you get up early, you get to launch, you fly, and if you bomb out after 30, 50, 80, 100 kilometers, you go home. But no, she walks up the next mountain and continues. If it's a good flying day, why would you go home? Why would you go home? You came to fly, so it's a good flying day, so make the most out of it. I found that attitude to be super inspiring.
Rico, before we move on to kind of the next thing, is there anything we haven't tapped into yet in terms of what you learned from the bivvy? Any other stuff you want to pass on?
Let me give you my take on why Volbiv carries some extra risk compared to just regular XC flying. Number one is flying into lee situations that just you need to get, your path that you're trying to follow or the place you're trying to go will invariably take you through lee situations almost every day. Then strong wind, coping with strong wind, landing in strong wind, flying on days where usually when you go fly, you pick the day according to the weather, but on a longer trip, very well from X Alps. So strong wind, slope landings is something that an additional sort of danger that comes with Volbiv, edging out storms. And the last one is sort of on like when you decide to launch somewhere, it's very easy to not see those couple of boulders that you think you'll easily clear, but if there's, if it's not lifty and you come out much lower, you can really underestimate how quickly you can crash into those because you're just a couple of meters lower coming in with, trying to go out with tailwind and not clearing those boulders. So those are some of the added dangers I compiled. Then there's, the one about flying into lees. Is that a word that's used in English?
Yeah, same thing.
Flying into lees. So I try to, I don't have a rule of thumb for that because there's so many different lees, and there's what I sort of tend to, the way I deal with those is first step, gather all data I can. So how strong is the wind? And that includes, even while flying, looking up wind data from other wind stations. How stable is the day? If the day is stable, the lee is going to be nastier. How much ground clearance do I have? Super important, in a trajectory and through the lee, especially the worst possible trajectory through the lee, assuming a lot of sink. How much ground clearance do I have? And can I sneak out of there? Is there a way to get out of there? So analyze all the data that is possible. And, is it, while approaching the lee, is it bumpy or smooth? Is it sucking or is it washing? And then once you've analyzed, when you think you've taken in every source of data that you have, sort of try to plan out what's the worst possible outcome if I fly where I'm intending to fly. What trajectory is that going to be? And then if you're willing to, if you map it out and say, even in the worst possible case, my trajectory will be more or less safe and I won't get stuck in a tree or slam into rocks, then sort of go with the flow, and be on the bees and try to go fast.
Yeah, what I found with Lee is there's often this, you get into, it's fine, and then you get into the wash zone or something that,
Yeah.
obviously you can't see. And the tendency right then is nasty, I'm going to run. And it's usually just a matter of pressing a little bit farther. And this is scary to make this as a generalization. Every situation is totally different, but usually if you just keep going a little bit and press in a little bit further and hang on to the wing, and then it's going to turn into the Lee climb. And that will, but you've got to have, again, not always, you've got to have enough climbing to get you through because you're going to hit it again. When you get up, if you start climbing and get up above it, you're going to hit that wind shear layer. And so it needs to be strong enough to punch you through that. But
I think the most important question for Lees and also other potentially dangerous situations is it worth it? Is it worth it? I mean, is it like if I'm just flying on an afternoon at a site, I'm not going to take that kind of risk because it's not worth it. I'm not going to take that risk even for an XC flight unless it's going to be one of the best flights I've done. It's usually not worth it, but there are situations where it's worth it because you're, because it's going to be a 200 kilometer triangle or so. Then I'm willing to take a slightly greater risk than I would otherwise.
Yeah. And in those cases, like Will Gadd says, when you do that, and if you crash or screw it up, then, we shouldn't have any sympathy for that. We're knowledgeably making that decision with full knowledge of what we're doing. And that's important. And there are times where that is what we want to do and needs to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I'm super proud of myself that I've not hurt myself ever flying, and I wanted to stay that way. So I tend to err on the side of caution. I try to detect when I'm compensating skills with courage. I really try to avoid that because the fact of the truth is if you chase this, if you chase it hard for a decade, you're likely to break your back in this sport. And that's just something I'm super aware of. I've seen it happen, or it's happened to a lot of friends, and I don't want to be one of them. And flying is really awesome. It's given me so much, but it's not worth it. It's not that good that I would, risk my back for it. And the fact that back injuries are likely if you chase it hard is just something I don't want to put up with. So you'll see me flying, taking, more, adding an extra safety margin compared to most pilots, just because I don't want to accept that risk.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would, after breaking the back, go, "Wow, that was worth it." Yeah. That just, no way. So yeah, that's a good thing to, kind of always have in your mind, is it worth it? Rico, as we get here close to an hour, do you mind if we switch over? We did this survey that we put out some weeks ago now, and I got all these fun questions, and I've been kind of pinging people with various ones. You mind if I just ask you some random quick response? Yeah. Okay. What was the biggest aha moment you've had with flying in the last year?
I think probably to let the glider fly. It's more than a year. It's 1.5 years, but I guess that counts also. It's early morning in Caico in Brazil. You launch at 6 a.m. and there was really not much out there and no way to figure out where the thermals are. Just following your intuition and letting the glider fly, and you don't really know. I think letting the glider fly to sniff out thermals is like an aha that's been it's taken me 27 years to get to that point.
What's the funniest thing you've ever seen flying, either recently or ever?
In Geneva, I used to live in Geneva, and there is an awesome flying club there. The LZ is sort of next to a farm, and there's chickens there. And on a strong thermal day, someone said, "Oh, let's take a chicken up to launch, and then let go of it in the thermals, and and imagine all the other pilots thinking, her coring the thermal, and a chicken comes their way, like centering next to them, and it's the kind of day where I swear to you, I swear to God, I saw a chicken thermaling. No one did it, of course. No one took the chicken up to launch, but that's what comes to mind in terms of
That's
fun
a great one.
episode.
What are your goals this next year? You had some big flights down in the Sertao, and you did this cool bivvy. Where do you want to take your flying now?
I've been wondering if I should try to learn like the sort of Alps landing techniques, the fly on the wall stuff. Kriegel has a tutorial on that. Although it's possible that those sort of landings are reserved for people who do, 300 hours a year, shouldn't be tried by people who aren't really professionals. That's something I would really like. Then what I strongly want to do is learn more about from other pilots. I've been most of my flying life I've been flying alone, and now these last few years I've been flying a lot with my buddies in Alps Freeride, and they are just amazing pilots, and I'm learning so much from them, learning so much about topographies and different valleys and how to do certain stuff. Speaking with other pilots also in the Swiss League, they're doing a great job to sort of share information. There's really so much where I still want to work on. Then in terms of accelerate, speed bar technique, I think I can get much better in efficiently flying on my B risers versus pushing and pulling the speed bar, with the two line. I've been flying 2-line wings for 2.5 years, and I think there's still so much for me to learn there.
Yeah, that's almost never ending. I find this always get more efficient. Last one, Rico. If you could only make one more flight in your life, where would you go? What flight would it be?
Oh, I don't know right now. There's a whole lot of them. But right now we're in the midst of winter, and they're not taunting me. So I ask me something else. That's
Did you enjoy flying in the Sertao?
Oh yeah. It's great flying. I'm not good at the team flying bit. I don't tend to get into a flow as a team. I just like to fly alone. But it's magnificent, and such good flying there, and such good vibes when you land somewhere in the middle of nowhere and chill with the locals and wait to get picked up. Yeah, that's really awesome.
Okay, so this will be the final one, and this is even harder. So I'm ramping it up for you. Why do you fly?
I've thought about that quite a bit. There is a couple of reasons. One is it's nice to have a mission, and flying gives you a mission, and it's a nice mission because you're every minute or every spare afternoon you're trying to get out into nature and spending time with nature and trying to do something that is not really intended for humans to do, and trying to do it as best as you possibly can. I think flying is one of the best sports you could practice, because if you want to have that sort of thing, because it's it ages well. Where you're a couple of years older than me, not much, but you're among the world's best pilots. Which sports is that possible? You can, and you're doing adventure racing, XC flying. There's no reason why you can't be an excellent XC pilot, be 50 years old or 60 years old. So that it was a good choice. It wasn't why I started flying, but it's definitely why I'm going to stick with it for a long time.
That's great. Rico, what a joy, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for reaching out to me and sharing with all of us your adventure. And very cool. We'll put some stuff up in the show notes about that, I'm sure. But thanks, man. I appreciate it. That was a lot of fun.
Very welcome. Good to see you again, and hope next time we see each other, it'll be somewhere at a launch and ready to take off.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Cheers.
Thanks, Gavin. Bye-bye.
When we rise, it's like the strawberry fields. I treated you bad, you bruised my face. Couldn't love you more.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account. You should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.